My good buddy Alex from Straights on the Fly Custom Fly Tying made me this absolutely gorgeous Temple Dog Spay Fly I'm going to cast with a long line. I'm going to use 15 feet of level mono leader 14-pound test. A few feet of lighter tippet material is also not a bad idea. I wanted to clear the air a little bit about Scandi lines and leaders. See, when I said you don't need a poly leader, it's because this. I'll literally run across guys on the Deschutes. They'll show me their outfit. They got a Scandi head and a mo-tip and then a poly leader and then a fly. You know, they're totally lost because there's so much information. They're selling poly leaders and VersiLeaders and tapered leaders and mo-tips and flow tips and sink tips, super fast sinking poly leaders. There's fast sinking, there's intermediate, and then there's floating poly leaders. I don't want to see guys out there with 3 different tips on their Skagit heads because they're confused. If you have a Scandi head and it's 35 or 36 feet long, which I think that's what this says, I can't see it, but if you, and it feels long on a spay rod, if you have this and you put on a 14-foot super fast sinking airflow poly leader and think you're gonna do underhand casting, the point I'm trying to make in this cluster of a video is that if you just think you're gonna take a heavier, longer poly leader or VersiLeader and stick it on the end of a Scandi line, you may have a rude awakening. Because you're not, if nothing else, you're not going to be using the Goran Anderson underhand Scandi casting stroke. You're going to at least have to use a big boy, a traditional space stroke to cast this thing if you can get it to turn over at all. So there's a huge difference in poly leaders and VersiLeaders. If I am going to use a bigger one, I would prefer to use it on a Skagit head, or at least something with a little more robust turnover power, such as the Gale Force 15-meter shooting head. Because you're going to have to switch over unless you're, you know, if you're a 6'6" guy and you've got a 14-foot rod, you might be able to do a little underhand and get it out there. But if you're the standard guy on the Deschutes fishing a 12.5-foot 7-weight, and if you're fishing a 36-foot Scandi shooting head, and I say you don't need a poly leader, it means you don't have to have a poly leader. You can, but all you need is a 15-foot level mono leader and still be fishing just fine. Might not have the best turnover, might be a little floppy, might be a little clunky, but it'll work. A poly leader comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes. The standard guy on the Deschutes fishing a 12.5-foot 7-weight, and if you're fishing a 36-foot, you're not, you're gonna have to do a full-blown spay cast. You're gonna have to lift from your side. You're gonna have to sweep. You're not gonna be able to go like that. You're not gonna do an underhand cast, which to me is Scandi casting. For the little short shooting heads, say a Skagit head with a 10-foot floating tip on it, such as a 10-foot floating mo-tip. Okay, that's a floating system. So a leader, a 10-foot airflow floating poly leader with a few feet of tippet, whatever works for you. I would probably go with longer because that powerful short Skagit head with a short powerful mo-tip, probably wanna, if you go with a poly leader, you're gonna add maybe 5 to 7 to 10 feet on there with a small fly, and then that way it's more of an underhand cast where you're just anchoring the leader. But say you're using a Skagit head, say a 20-foot long Skagit head, and then on the end of that you've got a 10-foot sink tip, 10 foot of T8, then you're just gonna have a 3-foot leader, okay? And then if you're gonna do underhand with that, that's a really short stroke. You might even use a weighted bug, whatever you like. And you're still gonna be able to cast with the little abbreviated underhand cast. That's Scandi. But if you put a 14-foot Polyleader on a 35-foot Scandi head, you're not gonna be Scandi casting, you're gonna be doing a full-blown spay cast. And there is a difference if you separate underhand from traditional spay casting. Underhand casting is only good for really short shooting head systems, and that is what the point I was trying to make. I want to make things super simple for guys that are just trying to get into spay casting. On the Deschutes, you use a Scandi in the summer and a Skagit in the fall or whatever, or you use a Skagit in the middle of the day when you want to fish a sink tip. I don't want to see guys out there with 3 different tips on their Skagit heads because they're confused. So what I'm saying is, I hope that this clears up, that when I say you don't need a Polyleader, it means you don't have to have a Polyleader. You can, but all you need is, you can do a 15-foot level mono leader and still be fishing just fine. Might not have the best turnover, might be a little floppy, might be a little clunky, or you could go with a tapered leader. You could go 35, 25, 20, 5 feet each, and then a 2 or 3 foot, 8, 12, 10, 15 pound tippet. Step it down a little bit if you want. I don't like to go through all that trouble. I just like to peel off 10 or 12 or 15 feet of my 12, 15 pound test, tie a fly on there and fish. And I don't care if I have to anchor a little bit of the fly line itself if I have a short leader. It was brought to my attention that if I used a Polyleader on there, then I can have a bigger D-loop. But if I wanted a bigger D-loop, I wouldn't be Scandi casting. I would put on a mid-belly spay line, and then on that I would put my 10 foot of T11 or T8. I'd use a gale force 15 meter, and if I could have a big D-loop, and I would cast as far as I could with just a traditional spay fly that had a big silhouette and easy to cast. And if I was able to have a big D-loop, I would put on a spay line there and just jack some line and enjoy my time on the river, which is exactly what you should do. Enjoy your time on the river. Do what makes you happy, but don't think you gotta buy. You could conceivably think, if you didn't do a conclusive study, that you needed a Skagit head or a Scandi head and a mo-tip and a VersiLeader and a Polyleader and a tapered leader. You don't need any of that. You need a Scandi head and a 15-foot level leader and small fly, or a tapered leader. If you have a Skagit head, a sink tip, and a floating tip, a light Skagit head, you don't want a big slodgy one if you're gonna do dry line work, I could be set. I would have a little tin of flies, or plastic container of flies, have 1 spool of tippet, 12 to 15 pound test. I would have a sink tip, 10 foot of T8 or T11. You adjust it to fit your fishing situation. The bottom line is I'm gonna start using longer leaders. For dry line work, please subscribe.